Hello everyone. My story was something that happened when I was 5. My brothers were 14 and 18 when this happened in 1970. My then 18-year-old brother was interested in the occult and searching for more meaning in his life. So Christmas time that year, both of my brothers each received a Ouija board, and they busted that thing out and went to town. Even at 5, I thought this was a no-brainer, and so later on, I was able to see the damage they caused, because after the first few times they used it, we immediately started seeing entities flitting back and forth and all around the house. I saw one in the shape of an adolescent boy running up and down our staircase, and with doors slamming at all times of the day, even at night. One time, I was at the living room sitting and watching Looney Tunes when I suddenly noticed what felt like an invisible hand wrap around my upper arm, and felt it squeeze its fingers into my flesh quite hard. Of course I was frightened, and so I immediately went into the kitchen where my mother was making dinner, and told her about it. When she checked my arm, she was immediately alarmed when she noticed that whatever that was, left finger marks on my skin, and obviously it wasn't me, as it's not in the direction of my other hand if I had inflicted it on myself. The following day after that, I suddenly had bruises on my body upon waking up, and my mother didn't like it when she saw it, and during the night, I would also hear footsteps on our wooden floor walking towards me. Sometimes, I would just have horrible nightmare, only to be awakened by a very raspy voice in my ear, where I would feel this hot breath blowing on it, even though no one was physically there. It was just like when a woman is trying to turn you on by whispering on your ears. It wasn't just me though. My brothers were also having similar experiences as me, and it took us a couple of years for us to rid the house of this monster that the board had lured in. Sometime later, I had a good friend that also wanted to experiment with the Ouija board. So I gave her one of our Ouija boards, having dismissed the issues we had with it before. Following that, my friend told me that she attracted an entity that hadn't had a physical life since the medieval times. Long story short, she had an issue with it after she had lit a candle to talk to this disembodied soul, where it suddenly lit her blouse on fire and burned her breast. She didn't tell her mother about it, as her mother was a very strict Catholic from Spain, else she would have beaten her with the hard side of a hairbrush had she found out about it. So she just covered her burn in vitamin E and gauze, and hoped for the best. Thinking about it now, maybe I shouldn't have given her that board after what happened to us. After all those experiences, I never once touched another Ouija board again, nor did I ever let my daughters bring one into the house. Hello everyone. I have a story here in 1997 when I was about a year or so into high school. I still remember that I was at my friend's house and playing Ouija board in her room, just two kids essentially playing around with her board. I was pretty open-minded about it, and if anything, not necessarily a believer or non-believer. This was for the simple fact that I had nothing to go on with, no experiences or anything to push me to either conclusion. Since one cannot prove a negative, the only real negatives against the paranormal was evidence of things against the paranormal, such as events which could be explained as something else. When we were in her room, we got the box out and immediately went to town chanting like idiots and doing all kinds of movie stuff to get spirits to communicate with us. I always thought that there may be some secret instructions in the box telling the owner to burn the instructions after reading the line telling them to be the ones moving the planchette when friends come over. Without taunting, we got a lot of seemingly benign contacts that I didn't really believe at the time, until one of them proved themselves. We asked it to give us a sign like they do in the movies, and not a split second later, her hamster slams onto its cage and seemed startled as it recovered. It was running around its cage, under the shavings and popping back up. It was acting like it was in some kind of danger, as if there was hawk flying above. I just thought it was just a coincidence, and we went outside after a little while after that. We go back inside and open the board again, and this time, we had a pencil and paper. After many questions, I needed more proof, so I told the spirit to write its name with my hand holding the pencil, so I closed my eyes and turned my head up. To my great surprise and shock, the word Zozo was written on the paper. The weird thing about this is that I had never heard the name before in my life, nor had I really known what was going on. I also just thought it could simply be some kind of subconscious thing going on. Let me tell you, when my arm was moving, it did not feel like someone was grabbing it. It felt like just the muscles required to move the pencil were tingling or somehow light or numb. I assumed maybe that ghosts just communicate through noisy channels, or maybe it was a misspelling or something lost in transmission. Years later, about just 2 years ago, I had talked to my longtime friend about this experience and we reminisced about it. I decided to Google Ouija Zozo, and of course the correct spelling of it came up Ouija Zozo as the first result, so I clicked on it. I have to admit that as a grown man, I do not get scared easily, but seeing the sheer amount of people who experienced contact with this entity sent the most intense goosebumps throughout my skin and more than I thought possible. This series of very uncoordinated, temporally spaced out, and geographically separated events is just way too precise to be coincidence, or some kind of mass hallucination. It was also very unlikely that this was a subconscious muscle twitching as stated before, since it was experienced by people hundreds of miles away from one another. Had I heard about this before the event, I could understand that it could be my mind playing tricks on me through power of suggestion. As a side note, for all the people I told my story to, and never believed me, I just couldn't convince myself it never happened. But it did. I draw no conclusions as to what happened. I'm open-minded to what transpired ages ago, but I am just as clueless. Hello everyone. My story took place when I was 13. At that time, me and my friend had a sudden interest of wanting to play with a Ouija board, but since we were young kids at the time, and didn't have any money, we decided to make our own, and so we used paper, a red pen and a coin. As 13-year-olds, we asked it ridiculous questions like, "Oh my god, does Billy have a crush on me?" That sort of shit. Then my friend told me she needed to go to the washroom, and I was left alone playing by myself. But my friend didn't even leave that long when all of a sudden, the coin starts moving back and forth very fast from the Z and the O. I have no clue how it even worked, and all I remember was being scared and quite literally wasting my pants and screaming for it to stop. It was scary, I tell you. Later that night, I was freaked the hell out because I felt like someone was watching me. I just broke down crying and I went to my mom and told her what happened, and of course, she starts freaking out too. So we lightly pack up and left for my grandma's place that night. I also remember looking in the bathroom mirror before having a bath, and noticed a red scratch starting to slowly appear from my neck, down to my belly button. When we went back to the house the next day, weird shit started happening. I swore I saw shadows in my doorway in the middle of the night, and would just hear noises on the hallway. Anyways, don't fuck with those boards, they are not a toy. Even if you make your own, it is very real. I'm not even sure how it still worked since it was just paper, but obviously, I can't explain the paranormal, no one truly can. In addition, my mom told me that the place we lived at that time was on native burial grounds, not sure if that has something to do with it, but who knows. Hey there, I have a story of using a Ouija board in our old house when I was a young teenager. A little backstory, our old house was built in the early 1900s, and we were told that it had a very dark story behind it. The original family that lived there in the house lived there for decades and with a lot of deaths, and apparently, there was a lot of turmoil going on between everyone. So obviously, the house was haunted. We've had weird things happening there all the time. The most common was the kitchen cabinets opening by themselves, the stove turning itself on, or the weird noises at all hours of the day like someone was walking upstairs when there was obviously no one there. So the story started when my friend and I had the great idea, but thinking about it now, probably the worst idea to use the board in the basement, which was a dirt cellar, where we had found things buried down there in the past like old pottery and jars. So we get into playing and ask who we were speaking with, and the board begins to spell out a name. Though now I can't remember what it was, as this happened many years ago, but I do recall it being one of the family names we knew of from the previous occupants. During that event, the furnace, which had been running quietly the entire time, suddenly roared to life, louder than I'd ever heard it, and scared the hell out of us. Frightened out of our wits, we screamed and took off running upstairs, leaving the board behind, and because of that, we didn't get the chance to finish the session as we were too scared to even think about it at that time. Soon after that happened, I would constantly feel as though I was being watched inside that house. In all hours of the day, I would feel this eerie presence, and I would just get goosebumps from it. 2 years went by, my then boyfriend that time went down the basement and got the board out one day, and it gave me the chance to finish what my friend and I started back then. No super scary haunting happened, but it was an experience that I would never want to experience again, never.